Hey guys, so this is Abby. I'm about to go put her back in her cage, but she wanted to say hello. She was a little bit restless this morning. Say hi, guys. Hi. Okay, so I'm gonna go pop her back in the cage real quick. Her or her sister was a little bit loud a few minutes ago, so I went to go check on them. It turned out they were just playing, but I figured while I had her out, I would put her in the video. So anyways, what this video is I had recorded this previously, but I used an app called Cloud App, and the render just never finished. So I spent, a little bit of time working on it, and the video was just lost. So I'm going to try to re-record it. I'm going to blow through it pretty quick, and these are just some bullet points that I wanted to go over. And as a quick disclaimer, I feel obligated to mention that this is all stuff that I've picked up on, noticed, observed, or heard about over an entire decade. So this is going to sound bad, and I hate to even say this because a lot of this stuff is stuff that makes the industry as a whole just look terrible. But this is not all something that you are going to experience in a week or a month. This is stuff that I've observed over 10 years. Also, these notes here, these bullet points, are notes that I took for myself for the outline of the video. So these might not make sense to you. So I'm going to go through and explain what each and every one of these actually does mean. What are all the reasons that we hear debtors say, "I've already paid this"? So first and foremost, and this is a huge generalization, but there's a lot of truth to it as well, and that's that debtors lie. You're going to speak to people on the phone. They have a lot of different motivations. Some of them lie because they're dishonest people. Some of them lie because they're stressed out and they want to end the call as quick as possible. Some people lie because it's sort of like a half-truth. They might think that they've paid it or have some inkling that they may have paid it or they paid something but they don't remember what it is, and they're kind of stretching that truth a little bit. Anytime that somebody says that they've already paid a debt that you have in your office, make sure that you have them send you a letter and make sure you specify that you need a release letter. Something along the lines of a paid in full letter, or it could be a payment plan arrangement letter, as well as a receipt corresponding for each payment listed on there. It needs to have the original account number, it needs to have the name of the agency that they paid, it needs to have the original creditor's name, basically all of the information that you need to verify that it's the exact same account. People know too much in the information age. What I mean by this is very simply, and when I say know too much, I don't mean that they have a lot of good information. I mean that they have access to some garbage information. If you search debt collector on YouTube, by the way, people don't think of it this way, but it's the second largest search engine. And it's actually the same thing with Amazon. Amazon is a search engine. It's a shopping search engine. But regardless, not to get too far off track, you search for debt collector or anything similar, debt collections. Look what you get here. The first two videos are UK's Scariest Debt Collector. This is about some criminal in the UK, completely unrelated. Now, the next thing you see is Last Week Tonight with John Oliver on HBO. This guy's video about never pay collections. I don't know what this is, but it also looks unrelated. And then Never Pay Collections. This is sort of an infamous video. Look at these views. It has 5.6 million views. Last Week Tonight with John Oliver, that's 15 million views. Now, the reason these videos have so many views, granted, this is network TV right here. It's HBO, but this is because of the confirmation bias. This is people looking for excuses to not pay debt collectors, and they stumble across this video as a result. And look what he advertises. This guy is running a some sort of service, maybe a credit repair service, which is a whole different story. I'm not going to get into that right now either. But these videos, this video, and this video, being the top 3 relevant results when you search debt collector, that's scary in my opinion. I'm going to go more in depth a little bit later about this video, about the John Oliver one, But this video right here and this video, I guarantee you, people have been sued because of following the advice from these two videos. I promise you it's happened. There is one good point that's made in this video.
But perhaps what's most concerning about all of this is that in some states there is a shockingly low barrier of entry into this industry.
And that's probably why a lot of you are involved with this industry. But to stay on topic, that was meant to be it was presented as educational, but realistically it was more of an entertaining piece. It was entertainment. But a lot of the things that were shown were the most extreme of the most extreme cases. And it was really passed off as being the norm. That it wasn't saying these are some outrageous things that have happened in this industry. It was saying this is what the industry is. And that was seen by so many people, and the industry has already had a bad reputation, so that didn't help anything. Then there's this website, 800 Notes. Any of you who have a collection agency currently, I'm sure know about this website. You cannot run a collection agency and not have your phone number flagged on here. When you call people, I don't understand where these people find the time to do this, but people go on this website and they blog about phone numbers. Look, this person's name is Never Pay a Collection Agency. This phone number right here, this was Redline Recovery Services. They were a highly legitimate, large agency. It's where I got my start. There were about, I want to say, 500 people that worked there. We had, hand scanners. We worked for some of the largest creditors in the country. We collected on mortgages. We collected on Resurgent Capital Service accounts, Discover, American Express. It did not get more legitimate than those people. But when you see these notations on here, it's everyone just complaining about, being scammed. And you know what? There are some bad agencies. They're not even agencies. There are con artists that do scam people. But you can't run even the most legitimate agency on earth without having your phone numbers blown up like this online. It's that confirmation bias where people want to believe that they're doing the right thing by not paying their bills. So they find other like-minded people, and this is what it turns into. Now let's talk about media for a second. Media is a very complicated situation. When you look at a debt broker's sale list, you see maybe 1 or 2 out of 100 listings will come with media. It's very uncommon, and I understand why that is. It's almost like it's unfortunate, but I can't really think of much of a better solution. The problem is that these documents, they come in PDF files, and they're not organized. So let's say that you get 3 pages of media per debtor, and maybe the first page is the application, the second page is a receipt for whatever the service or loan details are, and then maybe the third page is like a repayment option sheet or something to that effect. You might have, we'll say, 300 accounts, and each of them has 3 pages in a PDF. Those files are already huge. That right there is not something that the debt buyer can email to the person who purchases the account. It's a link that can be shared on Google Drive. It's just not a very efficient way to share that type of information. And on top of that, nobody does media the same. There's no standard for it. And of those 3 pages that I mentioned, some of them, by the way, have 9, 10, 11, 15 pages. None of them are ever in the same order. 2 people with the exact same account might have completely different media, completely different pages that serve completely different purposes. Now, I really like this. This is called SkyTrail Cash, and you can use the email address and then the last 4 of the social security number, and you can access the people's media this way. But this is intended for the debtors to log in and see their information or to apply for a new account. But when you sign in here, you can see the media. And SkyTrail, they don't provide media. When you buy from them directly, they don't give you media, but they're one of the few people that allows the collectors to access the information this way. And it's more like an unintended side effect, that sometimes the websites are set up like this, but it's not set up this way for the benefit of the agency. It's set up this way so that the debtors can access the information more easily. I bought a file last year. It was a 745 cache file, and the media came on a flash drive, like a USB stick, and the USB stick was password protected, and the person that I bought the accounts from didn't have the password because they never used the media. They loaded the accounts into the system, they collected on them, they didn't use the media. So that when I bought the accounts, they didn't have the password. They just didn't remember what it was. They didn't have any record of it in their email somewhere. So encrypting the media comes with its own set of problems, and it was also a huge inconvenience where we had to meet in person so that this flash drive could physically be exchanged. And then what makes everything worse is that the software used for collecting on debts is so archaic. None of them manage media well. So if you want to purchase, let's say, half of a portfolio, you want to purchase accounts number 1 through 250 out of 500 accounts. The person who has the media on the accounts where media exists that way now has to go through and find those 250 pieces of media for those accounts, and there's really just no good way to do that. There's no software that exists that I'm aware of that makes that process easy, so most people just stay away from media, or worse yet, when you buy something, maybe you'll be provided with all of the media for that entire portfolio, and I don't just mean the portfolio that you bought, but I mean the entire portfolio that you purchased a small piece of. And I'm sure you can see how that becomes problematic. Every person in the supply chain can potentially be responsible for misappropriation, from the cashier at the check cashing store to the debt collector at the at the lowest agency on the chain of title. And so what I mean by this is that the account can be compromised at any point in the chain of title, from the original creditor all the way to, let's say, the third agency that works the accounts. There might be 15 or 16 different entities on there. There's going to be brokers, there's going to be agencies that maybe middled the file, or agencies that purchased a larger file and broke it up for smaller people within their network. There's so many people that touch those accounts at any given time, and many people are really bad at handling data properly. And at any point in time, for each agency, you have all of the collectors at that agency, where maybe one of those collectors is, dishonest. Any possible way that an account could be, corrupted or compromised, I think is a better way to say it. It could happen, and then for every time the debt transfers from one location to another, that's one more point of failure. That's one more place where the debtor doesn't feel comfortable paying the collection agency because there's no brand recognition with ABC Collections. So when ABC Recovery Services calls the debtor then calls the creditor, and the creditor redirects them to the first agency, and then the first agency has a dishonest debt collector that picks up the phone and accepts a payment on an account that they no longer have in their office. Stuff like that is rampant in this industry. I think that in the entire 10 years that I was doing this, I received a check in the mail maybe 2 or 3 times ever from a client of mine or someone that I purchased debt from that then took a payment, whether it be by accident or the debtor just sent the payment in without following the chain of title. Like I said, 2 or 3 times in an entire decade that a check was sent to me. And I was working a lot of zeros and ones over that time too. There are countless vendors, service providers, small agencies, debt brokers, debt collectors that get their hands on these files. Any agency that's using Beam is probably considered to be like the biggest enterprise debt collection software. In my opinion, I think Beam is a complete dumpster fire. And the reason I say that is because it's one of those things where debt buyers like to use it because they can really monitor their accounts very well. So you see it, these large debt buyers are using Beam, but then they demand that if you're going to work their accounts, whether it be on contingency or you're going to regularly be purchasing debt from them, they want you to have Beam because then they could just drop accounts to you. So they don't have to deal with the whole emailing, or you should never really email a spreadsheet, a debt portfolio. But what this allows you to do is really to just drop accounts into another agency. But a problem with Beam that I noticed very early on to using it is that anybody, unless they've updated how the permissions work since I've used it, and it's possible that they have, but I don't think so. Anybody can export a dialer file. So any debt collector that has access to Beam can pull up the search bar and they can search for whatever criteria they want. They could say, I want to search for all of the accounts that have a creditor where the creditor's name is CashNet USA. It will generate a list of all of those CashNet USA accounts. They could even be more granular with the search. They could say, I want all of the CashNet USA accounts that have charge-off dates after 2018 where the employment has been verified. And they can generate a list of all of those accounts that fit that criteria. They could then export a dialer file. So now you have your average run-of-the-mill debt collector, someone that knows that debt is expensive and that there's a secondary market for it and that it's not uncommon for agencies to fight over accounts, just realizes that because of the software they're using, they have the ability to export this file right here. It's got the account number, first name, last name, email, we have gender, we have phone numbers on here, we have relatives and relatives' names. So what's missing? All they have to do at this point is, let's throw in a couple extra columns here, and let's say creditor. Well, they know that these are CashNet USA accounts. So now they have a CashNet USA portfolio. And now something else that they could add, they only wanted accounts that were, we'll say, from 2017 or 2018. Yeah, 2017, 2018. So we'll say, and let's just fill that all the way down. So for one, if you see this, if you see dates where there's something funny about them, like these ones, for example, they all increase by 1 day. So, just sort of keep that in mind. If you see something like that, or if you see that all of the dates are the same day, that's another red flag right there. So, this is not at all difficult to do. And this started out as a dialer file. Look at that. That's how easy it is to take a dialer file out of Beam and turn it into a very realistic looking debt portfolio. And these people all actually owe these accounts. But the person who's now in possession of this file is somebody who never should have had access to it. But it's because the largest debt collection software, the largest enterprise debt collection software, is allowing this to happen. There are the people that you trust your information with. There's the dialer companies, companies that you might sign up for a free trial with, where maybe they send out emails for you. Anybody that you provide your data to is another place where information can possibly be breached. You have dishonest, I'm going to say IT people, but when I say IT people, I use that term very loosely because a lot of people that own agencies are very bad with computers, and when they have somebody help them with a simple task like loading accounts, for example, this doesn't have to be somebody that's great with computers or a professional IT person. All this has to be is somebody that's a little bit better with computers than the person running the agency. And now that person, The best way I could say it is you would be blown away if you saw the lack of security that most agencies tend to use. Former debt collectors, that's another one. And just to paint you another picture here, let's say that there's a debt collector who just got his CDL. This isn't a true story, but it's based off of a true story. Somebody who gets a commercial driver's license, and now they don't have to be a debt collector anymore. So maybe that file that they accidentally got access to that one day that they've been saving, tucked away on their computer somewhere for if it ever made sense to use it for anything in the future. This person might take off with this file and you have no idea about it. And now this person's no longer in the industry. It's long enough that you or that the person thinks that it's never going to be tracked back to them, and now this person has compromised an entire portfolio of yours. You can be careful, but you can't stop people from stealing from you, beyond the point of having, good operational security. But people who want to steal from you are going to steal from you. And when you're in business for 10 years, for example, it's going to happen. It might not be a constant ongoing problem, but these portfolios do make their way onto the secondary market. Like, I'm sure of it. Here's another thing, is that people who have one debt tend to have multiple debts. That's a very true statement. I can't even blame a lot of these people, because a lot of these loans are like traps. It's like once they get started with taking these loans out, they can't they can't stop borrowing money, because then their paychecks start getting taken. These payday loans, you're giving the creditor the ability to go into your account and pull the money out before you have access to it. And that's what you agree to at the time, but you agree to that when you're not thinking clearly. You're not playing the whole scenario through. You're not thinking about what it's going to be like on payday when you need to purchase, you need to go grocery shopping, and the creditor has pulled all of the money out of your account. But what you see it especially with payday loans is that people will take out multiple payday loans, and these lenders, they all have very similar names. When you ask any debt collector, why are you in collections, what they're going to say is the bonus checks. So collectors are working on commission, and they'll run with a misunderstanding. A collector is talking to a debtor on the phone and tells the debtor, you owe Check and Go $400. And the debtor doesn't really remember Check and Go, but they remember CashNet USA again, for example. So the person says, is it possible that this could be CashNet USA? I don't recognize the name Check and Go. Now suddenly the collector realizes, I can go the correct route and say, no, those are two different companies. One's online, one is in person. Or they can take the easier path and say, I'm not entirely sure of the different names they go by. All I know is the name of the corporate office that had sent this over to us. But it's likely that if that's what you remember, it's probably a name that they operate as. And that's putting it nicely. There are the other people that will just say, yes, they do business by that name as well. And it's because these people they're motivated by commission, and they will run with a misunderstanding. And so many small agencies means that the owner is close to the collections process. As the owner of a collection agency, I was on the floor. A lot of times I would be on the phones. I'd be helping my collectors out with talk-offs. And when you're that close to the accounts, it's so hard to be objective about it. And I'll admit that there were times that I was in the industry and I was trying, one of my collectors says, hey, can you hop on this call over here? We've got an issue. I get on the call. The debtor says, you know what, I already paid this account 2 weeks ago. And I'm thinking, I just spent a fortune on this portfolio. And who is it that they just paid after I spent money on this file? And so I end up directing the debtor that whoever took that money from you was, they were a fraudulent agency. Go to the bank, dispute that transaction, and then pay it with us so that the funds are applied to the correct account. And that's something that any agency will realistically do. But now if you kind of back up and take a look at, well, how did that happen? Maybe the broker that sold those accounts to my office previously placed those accounts with a different office, and that account was an NSF where the person set up arrangements. They didn't follow the arrangements. They declined a transaction. Then when the accounts were recalled, maybe the person then picked up with their payments again and went back and started paying the old agency, and some records just kind of got skewed in the process. Granted, that is bad record keeping, but it still happens all the time. So now you have two agencies fighting over an account, and there really should be, what we refer to as collector courtesy, where agencies should be able to contact each other and talk about this. Hey, I bought these accounts from so-and-so last week. This person with this account number says that they're paying your office. So instead of encouraging debtors to charge back payments, which could screw over another agency who might not necessarily be at fault just because of the disorganization of the broker that was above them, there's so many things that I can say about this, but what it all comes down to at the end of the day is that there's too many people that don't handle the accounts well enough, that cause these types of errors to happen. And when you're the owner of the agency and you see these happening, it's hard to not feel like it's intentional, or malicious. When usually it's probably not malicious so much as it's a matter of bad record keeping. But when it's your money on the line and you're the person making the purchases and the investments and taking the risk, it's so hard to hear that one of your accounts is being collected on by another agency. And how many times have you seen a validation letter or a paid in full letter that doesn't have the original account number or even the creditor's name on it? The debtor is trying to send you proof that they paid an account, and the letter that they send you has no proof at all. Or it could be a validation letter, it could be a payment plan arrangement letter, but there's no evidence or indication that the person followed through with those arrangements. Dupes is sort of an all-encompassing term. It's duplicates, but it doesn't necessarily mean duplicate accounts. Here are all of the different circumstances that might be referred to as dupes, and I'm sure that I didn't accommodate everything in here, but this should help to give you a better example. So let's take a look at these two accounts here. So we have Janina Valen Smith. There's two separate accounts with CashNet USA. The current balance on one is $450, and the current balance on the other one is $300. The original account numbers are different on both of them, and the loans were taken out 3 years apart from one another. This is very possible. CashNet USA would be happy to give this person another loan after the account has been sold to collections and it's no longer owed to CashNet USA directly. So this isn't a third-party collection agency working on behalf of CashNet USA. It's a matter of CashNet USA selling the debt, a new fiscal year starts, time goes by, they start using a different system, and they don't have this woman blacklisted for some reason. It's very common. I don't understand why their record keeping is so bad, but it's not uncommon to see this type of situation. That's another reason why it's so important to make sure you always get the original account number when you get a letter. When someone says they've already paid it, you want to make sure you get that original account number. Now let's look at Culver Bohan, 745 cash. If we take a look at this one, this is interesting. There's a $700 loan, and then there's another $100 loan. The $700 was January 3rd, and then the $150 was February 3rd. So we try to figure out what happened here. And the original account numbers are the same. So the way that I would interpret this particular situation is that 745 cash gave the person an extension. He went back a month later, wasn't able to pay it, and requested an extension. So what 745 cash does is the way that their system is set up, they don't create a new original account number, but they create a new entry onto that account. So there's a second debt that's now created on that same account. Maybe it would be better technically to have it presented this way, where it's one single account where the balance is just added together, but now you're actually losing some information here, that the balance had changed because of an extension. So it really depends on the creditor. We'll say 745 Cash is it's a franchise, and so this is a mom and pop shop, and this is just how they choose to use their software. It might not be the same between creditors, but this is something that I've definitely seen before. Now, if we take a look at this one, Antoinette Heffernan has an account with Advance America and an account with Check & Co. Both for $500. Both are walk-in lenders. You actually walk in, write a post-dated check, and get cash over the counter. And so these very clearly have different account numbers, and sometimes you might even see that the open date for them is on the same day. But these are two separate accounts. This person, in some instances, may have gone out for a day and had no intention to repay these loans and just took out as many of them as they could on January 16th of 2017. Those are both legitimate accounts, but they're with different creditors, and maybe they ended up with different debt buyers. They probably did, because no single debt buyer is going to have the contract or the direct flow from every major creditor in the U.S. Okay, so if we go on to this next example, we have John and Jane Smith. They have different original account numbers, but they both have CashNet USA accounts for $600 on the same day. Your system might indicate that this is a duplicate account because it has the same last name, it has the same creditor, and it has the same address. It depends which software or which program you're using. Now, this isn't a duplicate account. This is a husband and wife that was nervous that they weren't going to be able to pay their mortgage, and they both went and took out a loan from the same website on the same day. Both of those accounts are valid, but again, they may not even end up in the same portfolio. It could be agency A over here working John's account and agency B over here working Jane's account, and they're probably not even going to be called at the same time. They may be called a year and a half apart from each other, for that matter. This next one is interesting. So this is Comenity Bank. What we see here is Victoria's Secret, GameStop, Forever 21, Claire's, H&M. And these balances are actually pretty low, but this is interesting because I really like these accounts. Comenity Bank accounts tend to liquidate well. You don't get too much pushback when you're trying to collect on these accounts, but I'm sure all of you can imagine how aggravating it is when you purchase a debt portfolio and you have one person that owes 5 separate accounts, because if this person refuses to pay, that's 5 refusals in one. But on the same token, they agree to pay, that's 5 payers. So it has its upsides and its downsides, and you really need to work the accounts accordingly. If you see that this one person has 5 separate accounts, make sure that they're all assigned to the same collector, and make sure that collector is somebody who's competent enough to collect on it. Because if you can get 5 payments in one call, that's incredibly effective. It's an incredibly effective use of your time. But now the debt sellers, on the other hand, the brokers, imagine that they don't handle this correctly. Imagine that they don't keep these files together and they get sold over the course of 3 separate portfolios all at the same time. So now you have 3 separate collection agencies all trying to collect on Comenity Bank accounts for the same debtor at the same time. And how do you think that's going to go over? So maybe you get upset when you see something like this, but when I see this, what I think is this broker did the responsible thing. This broker kept the accounts together to prevent 2 agencies from having to fight over these accounts. And the way that this happens is, when you go to the mall, you go to checkout and they say, do you want to save 15% today by applying for a credit card? And it's not a real credit card. It's a line of credit that can only be used at that store. But you go on a December shopping spree, around Christmas time, and you want to get that 15-20% off of all of your purchases. Now suddenly you end up with all of these accounts. And, people do spend this money. They don't even see it as real money. And then the accounts are sold as credit cards, although it's not like a Visa or a MasterCard. It's like a line of credit that's tied in with your phone number. So, again, it has its benefits, it has its perks, it has its ups and its downs. But it's all a matter of learning to collect on it and collecting in an efficient way. But these, again, will show up in your system, depending on your software, as duplicate accounts. You don't want to call Darren O'Delucia in January to collect on this account, and then in March, when you get a little bit further through the portfolio, you see this account. Now you have to call them back and ask for more money. So, that's why it's important that they get tied together as duplicates. So this last example right here is there was a creditor that a lot of people knew as BMG, which stood for Bahamas Marketing Group. They were shut down by the FTC. You can read about it online if you want. They then rebranded as QKD for a while. And what was happening is agencies were being raided and shut down for working these accounts. They were deemed to be fake. The thing about it is that these debtors did get this money deposited into their checking accounts. These were legitimate loans. But what happened was, let's say, and I don't know all the state laws offhand, but let's say that Florida has or at the time had a law that stated that you couldn't obtain a short-term cash advance loan for more than $300, that was the limit. But you go onto the website and you apply for a $1,200 loan, this is how they're going to give it to you. You're going to get that money deposited into your checking account, but it's going to be divided over the course of 5 different entities that give you the money all at once, and then the accounts get charged off this way. And again, did the broker pay close enough attention to make sure the accounts stayed together and not get split across multiple agencies? Usually no. Usually you have agencies fighting over it. The original account number, again, this is the important identifier that you need. But when you're talking to this person, and they already paid this account off with a different agency, they're going to say, I've only taken out one of these loans in my life, which is usually very uncommon. People rarely ever take out one payday loan, but I'm sure you can see exactly how that situation can occur from one person taking out a loan online from a company like this. So these are all legitimate accounts. All of these. What's not legitimate accounts is these two at the bottom in red. This right here is clearly a mistake. It's clearly a duplicate. It's a copy and paste. At some point, some broker or agency, hopefully unintentionally, as opposed to intentionally, made the mistake of duplicating these accounts somehow. This is the only dupe that is not a legitimate account. So when you're looking at dupes, you need to make sure to pay close attention as to what that means, where it originated from, and how it may have ended up that way. Then there's the general lack of oversight and the lack of standardization within the collections industry as a whole. So let's say that that we have the chain of title. You have 10 other entities above you in that chain of title, even though only 2 of those were actual collection agencies that had ever worked the accounts. So when you're working accounts, or you have a creditor or a debt buyer, what we would refer to as a client above you, the person who places the accounts with your office, we'll say that ABC Portfolio is placing accounts with you. And if someone pays them directly while the account is placed with your office, or if you purchase debt from them and then somebody pays them, they might send a check in the mail, whereas DEF Services gives the consumer my agency's phone number instead. Or GHI Holdings, for example, doesn't even answer the phone when a debtor calls them to try to find out where the account is. JKL Management doesn't let the secretary have access to the chain of title, so somebody calls them to try to find out where their account is, and the person who answers the phone doesn't even have a way to verify that information. MNO Partners feels that they're entitled to that money. Maybe this particular debt buyer is a little bit lower down the chain, and they made a purchase, and they just felt like the debt was overpriced. And despite the fact that they already sold those accounts, they might, just feel like they're owed that money. It's not right. It's not logical, but it happens. And then we have PQR recovery, scared off the consumer. So what I mean by that is, let's say that the consumer calls a creditor or a debt buyer to try to track down their account, and the account's just handled in an unprofessional way. Maybe PQR recovery is a single person that's investing in portfolios, and on the chain of title in some place, they put down their cell phone number as their company phone number, and now the debtor calls them and they answer the phone, hello, and then the debtor says, this doesn't feel right. That account's burned. Like, that person's not going to pay. And now this company will say STU Processing is listed as a scam online on 800 notes. This is a completely legitimate agency or debt buyer, debt broker, whatever it is, but there's enough bad notes about them online because they've been in business for a long time, and because they've gone through such a large quantity of accounts, that when the debtor is trying to track down the account and they call Capital One says that they sold your account to STU Processing. You look up STU Processing and all you see are these like scam reports on 800 notes. That could scare the debtor off too. And then I just kind of went through the alphabet if you hadn't noticed here, but WVXYZ had an FTC case, and they hired a compliance officer and some top attorneys to get them back on track. But the fact that they made a mistake when they were smaller has led to their name being permanently tarnished online. That is an exact situation that happened with who was at one time the largest debt buyer in the United States. They grew very quickly. They weren't incredibly organized, and they got in a lot of trouble with the FTC, which was largely the result of scaling without the proper infrastructure. And plus, they were held liable for a lot of things that people that they were selling debt to under them had done. And now these people, in all reality, I'm not going to mention who they are, but a lot of people have very mixed feelings about them. Some people feel like they're very unethical people. I've heard some stories that would blow your mind about how these people came to be so rich and well known in this industry. But it's the only point I'm trying to make is that it's perception. It's how are these people perceived online. When the debtor looks into it, are they going to think it's a scam? Or are they going to intentionally lie to you or tell you they never took the loan out because they see that the account had gone through this particular agency or debt buyer or brokerage that online consumers are reporting as being a scam? The point that I'm trying to make is that when there's an account that's created, the money is then owed to the creditor, right? Like it's very simple. You borrow money, you pay the money back. But then the problem is that people don't want to pay the money back. Understandably, it's something that people just don't enjoy doing. Nobody wants to deal with a collection agency. People want to hang on to their money, and when you borrow money, you don't tend to think about the future when you have to pay it back. So, people look for all these reasons to justify not paying their bills, their past due receivables. And even though they have a contract in place, they watch these YouTube videos where the person on YouTube says there's nothing they can do about it. And then people end up getting sued because they don't pay their bills, and they take that advice. It's like the sovereign citizens, the people who say, I'm not driving, I'm traveling. And, what happens every time? Their window gets smashed open by the cops and they get arrested because they were resisting arrest, and instead of just showing a driver's license, they decided to get argumentative with the cops. We have a lot of those people in our systems as debtors. It never fails to blow my mind how people justify feeling as though they don't owe the money. there are actual, what I would say, fraudulent agencies. They're not actually collection agencies if they're operating fraudulently, but there could be agencies that look like legitimate agencies where they have call centers, they have employees, but then they're purchasing real accounts, but in a highly illegal way. I'll explain that in a second. The spreadsheets being duplicated or stolen by call center representatives with too much access. It fuels a black market economy, just like I showed how with Beam you can export accounts for a dialer file, and then people can manipulate that into looking like a debt portfolio. And the penalties for credit reporting being so steep, that's sort of like an entirely different topic. But what I wanted to mention about fraudulent agencies is sort of it's a story. And one time I was operating my collection agency at this business park where it was all collection agencies around there. If someone lost their job, they could walk down the hall and be employed at another agency within 20 minutes. That's just how this place was. It was a decent place to start out. Like, the rent was pretty affordable, but it was a terrible environment in general. So one day, somebody comes down to my office. They knock at my door, and this guy tells me, "Hey, come down to my office. My broker is down there, and he's got some good accounts. If you're interested, he's got these accounts ready for sale right now." I go down to take a look at these accounts, and the guy was incredibly sketchy. He had a flash drive plugged into the computer. He didn't know what any of the files were. He was fumbling around in in Windows Explorer, like opening things and going, "Oh, no, forget about this one. Hold on. Let me find this for you." And then scrolling down, seeing how many accounts there were. It became very obvious this guy has no idea what's on this flash drive. And then I started realizing some of these are dialer files. They don't have social security numbers. These accounts were all just stolen or, acquired in one way or another. And, of course, I wanted nothing to do with this. It was clear as day to me what was going on. But the guy who had stolen these accounts was selling them so cheap that this other agency, the guy that came and knocked on my door, would always buy his accounts from this guy. And this guy would come to that office park once every so often and go meet with different agencies around there. And it's unbelievable. It is so outrageous. But some people just have really bad morals. They have no guilt in the fact that they are quite literally stealing and committing fraud. And this is one that I skipped over. Purchasing real accounts but working them in a highly illegal way. If you purchase accounts directly from Advance America, but then you run an agency where you have collectors threatening people with jail time for these accounts, these accounts might be 100% legitimate, but you've just delegitimized the entire collections process in trying to collect on them that way. And now when you don't collect on the accounts, because people are going to recognize the red flags immediately, you might make some quick money doing that, but in the end, you're going to get raided. You're going to get shut down eventually. And then whoever works those accounts after you is never going to be taken seriously. You never want to be the agency that purchases a file that was previously worked that way. Now, this bit about credit reporting and the penalties for it being so steep is that, I was in business for a decade. As I've mentioned, I never got into credit reporting. And the reason that I never got into it is because there's a few reasons, but I would say the main reason is because there's something called the FCRA, the Fair Credit Reporting Act. And once you put something on someone's credit report, it opens you up to an FCRA violation. You never know 100% if all of the information that you're reporting is 100% accurate, because you don't know if the people above you, if the lenders, the creditors, the brokers, the debt buyers, anybody above you could have made a mistake at any point, as I'm sort of going over all the places that does happen. but you report an account on someone's credit report, they can then file an FCRA lawsuit against you. And, one lawsuit will wipe out an entire portfolio's worth of profits. I know one person in particular who spends, I want to say $15,000 a month on a debt portfolio every month, reports it to TransUnion, and then makes the money back and then some off the people calling back to pay. Just because they see it on their credit report. With Credit Karma, people get the pop-ups on their phone saying you have a new item that hit your credit line. They take a look at it, and then they call in and they pay, and that's the end of it. This guy figured it out because he started doing it with one very specific creditor, and it just happened to work out well for him. It's always been scary to me because lawsuits, for one, are just terrifying in general, but you can't take that back. It's not like when you call a debtor and they get upset because you contacted them at work, and you can sort of talk to them and smooth it over and say, look, I'm happy to remove this phone number. In fact, we'll close the account out. Don't worry about it. We'll make sure that your account isn't sold or placed with any additional agencies. And, for future reference, make sure that you don't list your employer phone. Whatever you say, you can smooth that over. But once you report it to the credit bureaus, it's reported. There's nothing you can do. There's no smoothing that over. That person is going to blame you for not getting approved for their mortgage, or they're going to blame you for getting denied at the car dealership. And one lawsuit will wipe out an entire portfolio, maybe an entire month, 2-3 months worth of profits or even revenue. Like, these lawsuits can be brutal. So I've always stayed away from that. And it's unfortunate that that's the case, because if every agency could report to the credit bureaus, there'd be much more accurate record keeping. There'd be more accountability from the debtors, and it would hold agencies to a higher standard with data integrity. So another thing we have lenders that don't understand the collections process. There's too many examples to go through here, but what I'm going to mention is that bank overdrafts are a perfect one. You buy some U.S. bank DDAs, the charged off checking account balances, and then you call the debtor to try to collect on the account. The debtor goes to U.S. Bank, and then you get a call back later that day saying U.S. Bank said that you're a scam, not to pay you. And the thing that is just sort of crazy is that the bank teller that person spoke with has they have no idea how the collections process works. If you can get that debtor, however, to go back to U.S. Bank, sit down with a branch manager, and get the branch manager to call up the collections department, and then the collections department to go back through their records of the charged off receivables, find out who it was sent to, like, that account will work its way back to you. But it's such a niche situation that you have to direct the debtors to actually go sit down with the branch manager and have them contact the collection department. And then you have to hope that everybody associated with that operation is actually, at least somewhat knowledgeable about the collection process. And a lot of times they aren't. So another thing is when, I don't know how these bullets ended up this way. I threw this together, like in a new tab. So I clearly split some things in the wrong place. But anyways, you see when a bank teller looks something up, John Smith. Okay, John Smith, I actually don't see that you have an account with us. No, of course John Smith doesn't have an account with them because it was charged off into collections. The bank sold it to ABC Recovery Solutions 3 years ago. The tellers just don't understand the process, and a lot of times the branch managers don't have any firsthand experience with the collection department. It's usually a very specific department at the main location, like the headquarters. So you also have to hope that they keep good records. There's a lot of times where banks just don't keep good records. One example that I can think of is when Wachovia was bought out by Wells Fargo. They basically lost all of the old Wachovia records. Like they were there, they were available. If you dug deep enough and you had enough access at the bank, you could find the records that you were looking for. But there was no system at all in place when they were bought out for someone at Wells Fargo to accept or even notify an old Wachovia banking customer of a past due account and accept repayment on it. But Wells Fargo did proceed to sell all of the charged off receivables so that the collection world could handle it. But then when the debtors go in to say, I'm getting a collection calls for a Wachovia bank account, then you have a bank teller or a customer service representative with Wells Fargo saying, well, Wachovia is not in business. Nobody should be collecting for them right now. And then they tell the debtor that it must be a scam. Someone's trying to scam you. Don't pay them. So again, it's a lack of understanding of the collection process. And then we have lenders who don't respect the collection process, which is pretty similar, really. It's reputation management. Wells Fargo just took a hit a few years back. They had this scandal where they were opening up fake accounts to boost their commissions or their numbers, whatever the case was. They were in reputation management mode when that hit the news. And right around that time, we were finding that when we were trying to work Wells Fargo accounts, people at Wells Fargo would always tell the debtors not to pay their accounts that were in collections. And it's because collections is it's like a taboo industry almost. It's looked at that way by some people. And they're already trying to manage their reputation, and they don't want to take on the risk of how collection agencies might be making them look with maybe aggressive collection attempts. So as a response or a complete overreaction, they just told people not to pay debt collection agencies for their accounts. Because they don't care. It doesn't affect them. The accounts have already been sold. They already made their money back. They already wrote off their losses. Anyways, that's like one very specific scenario, but it really just goes to the larger picture of lenders not understanding or respecting the collection process. Then we have dishonest brokers, mislabeling portfolios. The portfolio could be reported to them wrong by the person who's looking to sell it, because a lot of these debt brokers are just middlemen anyways. And then one scenario that I still can't even wrap my head around this, but there's one of the largest debt buyers in the U.S. They'll sell one agency, two agency, three agency accounts. They sell zeros, but then they sell what's called I want to say true zeros. They call them true zeros, or ultra zeros. They call them ultra zeros. What does ultra zero mean? It means that they're zero agency accounts. So if that's the case, what are their zeros? Their zeros are ones. Their ones are twos. Their twos are threes. And it's so stupid that that the way that they operate is that they tell themselves, we are so legitimate and so easygoing that our collection attempt doesn't even count as a collection attempt. I don't think anything else really needs to be said about that, but that's just something to be mindful of. There's dishonest agencies. There's a lot of dishonest agencies. Dishonest debt collectors, the individual collectors that you're dealing with that might be, you could even say, rogue collectors. Then there's the in-house collection efforts. If CashNet USA, for example, wants to try to collect on some accounts before they sell the accounts, who knows how that's going to go over. They might not be trained. They might not, follow the laws. And maybe they burn the account before it's even sold as zeros. Things like that do happen. And now with the chain of title, so to speak, a chain of title doesn't really exist. There's no document really that's called the chain of title. the chain of title is just something to be aware of. And it really should be standardized. But the problem with it, there's actually a few problems with it. Let me demonstrate something. Disregard the fact that these all have the same addresses and phone numbers, but let's say that this is a chain of title, and this is, in a sense, what a chain of title would look like if it was like a tangible document, is that we have Advance America, which is the lender. And that, I mean, ideally there would also be dates on it. So it would say, we'll say, I don't know, January 1st of 2016 is like the account origination date. And then maybe it would specify the, we'll say charge-off date. So it might have like origination date and charge-off date, something like that. So let's move away from this for a second. Let's go look over at this sort of like this pyramid-shaped tree. So you have Advance America at the very top. And then we'll say AA Recovery Services, which is Advance America's in-house recovery services, like their in-house collection department. And then we have United Holdings Group, which isn't a real company, but I'm sort of modeling it after a real company. So some of you might recognize what that's supposed to be. But they're up at the top, and they spend $4 million on the paper. They don't work accounts ever. They just buy accounts and resell them. That's all they do. They break into smaller portfolios. Also, for the sake of this demonstration, I'm taking markups out of the equation. So I'm just trying to use nice, even, round numbers here. But obviously, United Holdings Group isn't going to buy a $4 million portfolio and then break it off into 4 separate $1 million portfolios. Maybe they'll break it into 4 separate $1.5 million portfolios, you know? So with that being the case, let's say that that's what happens. UHG buys the Advance America file, and then they break it into 4, $1 million batches of accounts and sells them to these 4 agencies. Or, well, not agencies, but entities. So let's take these ones out of the equation now, because we'll say we're following the chain of title, and then this is where it goes next. JKL Management, or whatever you want to call them, they then sell the accounts to, they break up their $1 million batch and they sell it to 5 separate entities in $200,000 batches. So again, let's delete these. And let's try to keep all of these over in one area. I'm trying to get these onto the same screen. So we'll move it over here. Don't mind me. Okay. So you have 2 layers of Advance America before it gets to UHG. UHG sells some of the accounts to JKL, who sells some of the accounts to Q Asset Group, who then breaks off the accounts into 4 separate $50,000 batches of accounts. And then this guy, John Smith, he has a connection because a good buddy of his from high school is a broker with this company or this entity right here. And then he also has a buddy from college that runs a collection agency over here. So now this John Smith guy, he's technically on the chain of title because he middles the accounts from this person to this person, because this broker won't sell directly to this agency because they don't know that agency. And if this person tries to reach out to this company, it's not like they're not in their business model. It's not somebody that they know of and trust and feel comfortable doing business with. But it's okay if John vouches for them, right? So then you have these people who, it gets broken into $10,000 chunks, then maybe from there it gets broken into $2,500 chunks. And out of that, only 2 of these might actually be collection agencies, and the rest are just brokers. So now let's look at what the chain of title would look like on that. We have Advance America, number 1, Advance America Recovery Services, number 2, and we have United Holdings Group, number 3, JKL Services, which is the debt buyer or broker that just kind of breaks up into smaller chunks. We might have a few layers of that. And then we have a debt buyer, which is also a collection agency. We'll say Our Recovery Services right here. And then we have John Smith after that, who's just a broker, and he sells the accounts to Z Management, which is a debt buyer / collection agency. But by the time you are purchasing your first portfolio and you have a $2,500 budget, this is sort of like the path that portfolio has followed. And in the process, you are purchasing 2 agency accounts, but it's been through 8 separate entities previous to reaching you. So to keep those records on point the whole way through the chain is one thing. It's doable, but it requires a lot of people being responsible, honest, accurate, and just keeping good records. And on the other hand, the other side of the token is that John Smith might not want Z Management to try reaching out to Our Recovery Services, or the Q Asset Group might not want Our Recovery to know that JKL Services is where the accounts are coming from. Although Z Management can call Advance America and then ask Advance America where did the accounts go to, and they could follow the chain of title all the way down the chain. But the thing is that so many of the people in this list purchase the portfolio just to break it into smaller chunks for the people below them that it becomes so difficult to follow. And I think that the reason that this probably isn't an industry standard is probably because it's like people don't want to go around advertising where they get their accounts from. Otherwise, it opens them up to being undercut. And I like to think that the collection industry isn't incredibly, competitive. That is where I'm looking for. Like, there's more than enough debt out there for everybody. But when there's a particular lender and they sell their debt, or they accept low bids, everybody wants to be the one that has that forward flow agreement with those people. So yeah, there is a lot to do with secrecy there, and understandably so. So this chain of title, it exists, but this is not a document that gets appended to every sale file. That's like, it just doesn't happen. In a perfect world, it would. In a perfect world, there would be a way to create this document while having it be maybe encrypted in some way that it could be verified for legal purposes, but that it wouldn't get people into trouble. Because something else that you have to be mindful of is, let's say that we have this agency, the little guy here, small agency 1. They have no brand recognition, but UHG, United Holdings Group, there is some serious brand recognition there. And if you look them up online, you see that they're licensed, bonded, registered, insured, accredited. They sponsor this event, they sponsor that event. They've won this award. So now you have people, debt collectors from this agency, who are going to tell debtors, we're working these accounts on behalf of United Holdings Group. Now United Holdings Group gets a lawsuit from Joe Schmo that doesn't feel that his account was properly handled, and now UHG is no longer going to sell accounts to JKL Services because they're saying, what are you doing putting our name on paperwork? It really gets kind of complicated. And we live in America, the land of litigation. You could sue anybody for any reason at any time, and it's just absurd. It really is. Like, I've become very bitter over how the court systems work when it comes to litigation. I've been on the wrong end of it too many times. Like, I've never sued anybody a day in my life. That's never been my business model before. But and I'll admit when I do something wrong, if one of my collectors isn't trained well and they say something stupid on the phone that gets me sued, right, I understand and accept that. The end. But when people who I've never heard of, whose accounts I've never worked, are suing me personally, when my heart drops to my stomach every time there's a knock at my door because I think it's a process server, and then some agency that I've never heard of contacted somebody and I'm the one that gets sued for it, I don't know. It's hard to be unbiased on that entire topic there. But I still, the other day someone knocked on my door. I haven't been involved with collections really since November of last year, and I'm still terrified every time I get a knock at the door that somebody's trying to sue me. The last lawsuit that I had, I've probably told all of you about it at one point or another, but it was somebody whose account we never worked. Never once did we ever call this person. We had no involvement with it, but this person was still able to sue me, my company, everybody in the chain of title, and I wasn't even in the chain of title. It's like it's so hard to prove that. It's so hard to prove a negative. To prove that you didn't call somebody is so extremely difficult. And then when this debtor is representing themselves, when they're a pro se litigant, the court system is incredibly flexible with them. They let them make mistakes. They let them do things incorrectly. Whereas the person who was actually paying a fortune for an attorney is held to this outrageous standard that how do you prove that you didn't call somebody? I mean, you could say submit your call records. We submit our call records. It did us absolutely no good. The debtor started claiming that we clearly used some sort of software to manipulate the call being sent out without showing up on our statement. Or it's public record. You can probably find it online if you really want to read the details. But I'll make a different video going into that because it is kind of an important topic. Now, there's genuine data integrity errors. There's issues where the databases get corrupted. Databases and data in general are very complicated. Understanding how databases work, understanding how data is formatted, understanding how the software interacts with the database, knowing best practices, and then also expecting everybody in the chain of title to all handle the accounts the correct way, the safe way, the way that keeps the data integrity intact. It really is like too much to ask. So I think that what all of this comes down to is that this industry is outdated. It needs some serious, some serious modernization. And if you want to purchase debt and feel good about where it's coming from, you want to go with Debt Trader. But the problem with Debt Trader is that you can only get approved for them if you have, I can't remember if it's 2 or 3, I think it's 3. You need to have 3 references that are already Debt Trader approved, and then you have to go through a very, very strenuous due diligence period. It will cost a fortune to meet with an attorney and get all of the legal documents that you need for the compliance audit here. Over the years, my agency probably spent somewhere between, I want to say like $40,000 to $60,000 on compliance documents, and you know that the debt is going to be at least traceable, legitimate. It's going to be reasonable debt. This is the best way I could put it. I don't even want to say good because I'm sure there's a fair share of people on Debt Trader that sell like truly distressed assets, accounts that are really just not liquid at all. It's bound to happen, but I would feel comfortable buying debt from Debt Trader. But if you buy debt from Debt Trader, you can't resell that debt. You can't sell it to anybody that's not also Debt Trader approved and authorized to purchase that file. If you buy debt from Debt Trader, you can't place accounts with an agency that's not Debt Trader approved. But if you've ever worked Debt Trader paper, you know that it probably liquidated a hell of a lot higher than the stuff that you got from somewhere that was not Debt Trader. So I have a few other topics I'm going to be putting some videos out about, hopefully over like the next week or two, because I'm starting to get a lot of the same questions again from different people. But this was a big topic. I wanted to cover it. I tried to make this quick and to the point, and I'm seeing that I'm already over an hour right now. So just know that I tried. Hopefully you watched this sped up to 2x speed or something, and hopefully you got some good information from this and a good understanding of how the secondary market works. But until the next video, just be safe. Don't buy debt from strangers. Continue networking. Meet people. Build your professional network, and the opportunities will find you. And be safe. Follow the law. Respect the industry. Try not to, hurt the name of the industry or the reputation of the industry. And hopefully doing the right thing will work out for you in the end.